Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and in the video I did yesterday actually discussing that debate over ketogenic diets, I had a subscriber ask me, are there any health negatives to high-fat diets? So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this, because negative health effects of high-fat diets are documented in the scientific literature, and that's something that a lot of advocates of ketogenic diets don't want to address. Now, I will state up front, some of the health negatives of high-fat diets are reduced dramatically if you happen to do a ketogenic diet. That is one of the big differences, because you're dealing with something where you're not combining large amounts of fats with large amounts of carbs. I mean, that's usually your death sentence right there. Particularly refined sugars. People who eat a lot of refined sugars with a lot of fat, those are people who suffer enormous health negatives. Those are the people who get diabetes, obesity, everything else. And that's one of the big things that people need to realize when they say, oh, whenever I eat a lot of carbs, I have this problem, that problem. But then you look at their diet and it's not the carbs that's the problem. It's like, I can assure you, no one in medical history has ever developed diabetes from eating too many plain potatoes with no butter on them, or too much white rice. Fat cultures that eat these as a primary staple of their calories very, very rarely develop diabetes or insulin resistance. It's very, very low in cultures that eat most of their calories from starches. It's the combination of a bunch of refined sugars with a bunch of saturated fat. So a lot of people's idea of carbs is like, oh, a slice of pie, a slice of cake, till you realize that that's actually, if that's what you ate, most of the time you would be on a high-fat diet. So what do we mean by a high-fat diet? That's usually defined medically is any diet that's at least 40% fat by calorie. All right, when you start hitting above 40%. Well, when you go look at a lot of these pastries and cakes and pies and ice cream, and you start looking at the calories, it's not hard to realize a lot of these foods exceed that number. A lot of these that we think of as sweets and treats, that's the reason we think of them. So people say that's high-carb foods. They're actually high-fat foods. They're actually probably slightly more fat than carbs sometimes, with just almost no protein. I mean, you talk about a recipe for disaster, something that's 45% fat, 45% carbs, mostly sugar, with 10% protein. That's obviously not a food you want to eat in excess, all right? But people will always blame, oh, it's the carbs. No, it's the combination of the fat. Now, that being said, health negatives of high-fat diets, let's talk about it. In fact, just this week, and you've seen studies everywhere, it's all over CNN, MSNBC, everyone else, scientific data has been linked in colon research and cancer research that shows that colon cancer, they have found the direct link and the causation between high-fat diets and colon cancer. They've actually found the actual pathway through which high-fat diets directly cause colon cancer. All right, it has been discovered, it's been found, it was just released this week, as a matter of fact. Why is that a big deal? Because it's the third most common cancer, and it kills a lot of people. Colon cancer, they say there's around 130 new cases diagnosed, 130,000, all right, 130,000 new cases of colon cancer are diagnosed every year in the United States, every year. So there's one right there. Now, as far as lipid profiles and cholesterol and everything, I'm not going to jump into that, because you know what? People will argue, well, you can't talk about dietary cholesterol and human cholesterol because it doesn't even affect everyone. That way, they're right. Actually, at least half of the population, genetically, their blood lipids, their cholesterol, when you do their blood work, actually isn't directly linked to their dietary cholesterol. Only something like a third of the population to a fourth of the population will actually see their cholesterol raise as a result of dietary cholesterol. Now, the other thing is, of course, people want to say, well, since it's only a minority of people, it's less than half, then it shouldn't be an issue. That's kind of dumb. That's also like saying you shouldn't, playing Russian roulette is safe because you've only got one bullet in the chamber. I mean, it's only a 1 in 6 chance it's going to kill you. And even then, even if you shoot yourself in the head, it's not a 100% chance you're going to die, right? Not usually the best logic to use, to say, well, there's only a 1 in 3 chance that this is going to cause you health problems just due to your genetics, 1 in 3. So I'm just going to take the risk and I'm going to eat shitloads of dietary cholesterol. Probably not the wisest of choice. Statistically, the odds are in your favor, but the odds are also in your favor to play one round of Russian roulette. I mean, you got 6-to-1 odds, that's pretty good. But when you think of it in those terms, it's not necessarily smart. That's like saying DNP only kills 1% of people who use it the first time, and it only gives brain damage to 1% of people who use it the first time also. So that makes it totally safe. Let's go do that. Again, not a wise idea. But that's minor because it doesn't really affect everyone. Your real issue with a high-fat diet happens to be insulin resistance. Everyone wants to blame refined sugars exclusively for insulin resistance. Doesn't seem to be entirely the case. There's plenty of data out there over the years that has shown that saturated fat actually contributes to insulin resistance. Actually contributes, and insulin resistance is the source cause of a lot of your heart disease, your diabetes, even potentially cancers, higher obesity rates, because people with insulin resistance overproduce insulin, right? You overproduce insulin, what does it do to your appetite and energy level? It tends to cause fluctuating blood sugar levels. Low blood sugar makes you lethargic, and it makes you want to eat more. Well, moving less and eating more is a recipe for obesity. All right, insulin resistance doesn't change your calories in, calories out directly. It doesn't like change your metabolism. You still have to overeat to get fat with it, but you're going to be biologically predisposed to overeat as a result of it. And people say, well, no, that's not true because, I've done a keto diet and it seemed to help my diabetes. Yeah, it temporarily helps it, but it didn't improve your insulin resistance. It's because you're eating a diet that has so little circulating insulin, due to all the fat being your primary fuel source, that you're not noticing the negative effects of your insulin resistance. It doesn't go away. And that's what people need to understand. When you're talking about really high-fat diets and that, people maintain their insulin resistance. They maintain their hypoglycemia. They maintain their pre-diabetes. The only reason sometimes these diets help in the long term is because they lose weight because they eat less, which is the perk of those sort of diets. But it doesn't cure insulin resistance at all. If you want proof, go do a ketogenic diet for the next 6 months and then do a carb up day. Do a carb up day and tell me how your insulin resistance has been cured. No, all you've done is mask the symptoms. That's like saying I'm cured of my alcoholism until you go have a drink again. But the fact of the matter is the diet that you're continuing to do, the really high-fat diet, continues to contribute to the insulin resistance. All right, and again, that's stuff I've learned the hard way messing with ketogenic diets. It took me to transition back to carbs. It was really difficult because even though I was lifting weights regularly, doing everything else, it just didn't help particularly with that. And I would have some hypoglycemia and stuff. The first month I came back to eating carbs, the first couple of months, I had days where I suffered hypoglycemia. Sometimes even higher glycemic index carbs that don't cause this, like white rice, would cause me those issues. And it's just what happened when I ran a ketogenic diet for a year. While on YouTube, it was difficult to transition back because the reality is the diet itself contributes to insulin resistance. You just don't notice it because you're eating so few insulinogenic foods, because protein is insulinogenic, but when protein's only 20 to 25% of your caloric intake, that doesn't produce very much of an insulin response. So you just don't notice the fact that you're still insulin resistant. It's not curing it. You're staving off the symptoms by avoiding insulinogenic food. But again, for most people, that's not going to be something they're going to do for the rest of their life. And that's the downside of it when people use really high-fat diets like that to cut. They still find that they're insulin resistant when they go back to other diets. People have been cured of their diabetes by plenty of medical doctors using the other approach. Very high starch-based diets, people who eat grain-based diets, who eat very, very low fat, almost no refined sugar, their diabetes generally tends to be cured unless they've gotten really severe. Yeah, but even then, their medications can be reduced. It tends to be cured usually within a year. And there are hundreds and hundreds of medical cases of doctors curing people's diabetes this way. It's very well documented. Ketogenic style diets are really high-fat diets, high-fat, low-carb, stave off the symptoms. They're not an actual cure per se because it doesn't remove the diabetes, it doesn't remove the insulin sensitivity. It's just used as a treatment to stave off the symptoms. Whereas an ultra-high carb diets do seem to cure it as long as you're keeping your fructose intake, which is your refined sugars, low, and you're keeping your dietary fat pretty low. Just eating mostly starches over time seems to cure it. So carbs aren't even the cause. It's the wrong type of carbs and the wrong type of fat. But just in general, this idea that high-fat diets don't cause health problems, and people want to promote this all the time, they actually do. Talk to any registered dietitian, talk to medical doctors, cardiologists. You're going to find that people say, well, their information's out of date. Not really. Maybe your information's out of date. Maybe people here in the fitness world come up with every single fad diet known to man and mess with it, and they think that they actually know more about biochemistry and about nutrition than registered dietitians who've worked in metabolic ward and done clinical work and have a master's degree in the field, a graduate degree in the field, and done clinical work in the obesity ward and metabolic wards and everything else. They think that they actually know more than they do about these things. And the reality is, you probably don't. I can promise you the overwhelming majority of fitness gurus, 99% of them, do not understand nutrition anywhere near as well as a registered dietitian does. That would be like saying that you understand brain surgery because you studied stuff in books and maybe you did whatever, and a side thing that you understand the operations of the brain and the internal aspects of the brain and the chemistry of it better than a neurosurgeon. You probably don't. Let's just be honest here. And again, you'll find it with most of these registered dietitians will say that a really high-fat diet isn't good for you. And there's plenty of data to back that. It's not just something arbitrarily being said. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.